All right, your overall thoughts on what you saw over the last 3 days.
Yeah, good. I wrote this for cleveland.com for the morning. They really went in on the passing game, right? I mean, you could see how you get a left tackle to protect Baker Mayfield. They go tight end in the fourth round to give Baker another weapon. They go Grant Delpit, who I think is going to lock up in coverage a lot, even though he's a safety. It sounds like he'll play some slot corner. That's about stopping the passing game. Um, they've really almost checked all the boxes now on this roster: cornerback, pass rusher, offensive tackle, receiver, and quarterback. You got to throw to win in the NFL. I know people love Nick Chubb. I know some people are worried about do they have good enough linebackers. You got to throw to win. And I think the Browns, with the things they did in this draft and what they did in free agency and what they've done the past several drafts, have sort of finally locked down all the positions you need to throw it effectively and stop other teams from throwing it effectively.
Well, if we didn't think tight end was important to Kevin Stefanski, we know it is now.
Yeah, and again, and John Dorsey did this to some degree last draft. It didn't all necessarily work out, but Hunter Bryant doesn't have to come in and play a gazillion snaps for them. Not when you have Austin Hooper and David Njoku, but you don't know what Njoku's future is. I mean, I think everybody should hope that David Njoku has a huge season for the Browns, and then you have a good problem. But they need two good tight ends on this roster. I think they're going to view two tight ends as starters in a way. And so when you think about Njoku's future, if he's not going to be around, well, let's get somebody now so that maybe the future is, Hunter Bryant and is it Hunter Bryant or Harrison Bryant?
I believe it's Harrison Bryant.
There's two Bryants, and they have an H name, and I'm old. That's not on me. Take that out in editing. But yes, Kevin Stefanski wants tight ends, and so you get one in free agency and one in the draft, and you plan for not just next year but the future.
Are you intrigued at all by Donovan Peoples-Jones? I know you likely saw him in the Big Ten. Guy that was banged up this year, big frame, really talented return guy. What's your perception of? I know you've seen him play a couple of times.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued, and I told Donovan Peoples-Jones this. He didn't care. I mean, why would he? But I remember talking to him at an Ohio State recruiting camp when he was 15 years old. Ohio State was the first school that offered this kid. He was from Michigan, from a high school in Detroit that Ohio State had some success recruiting, and they were all over it. That great Ohio State 2017 recruiting class, Donovan Peoples-Jones would have been the cherry on top of that thing, and Urban Meyer went hard after him. And he wound up picking Michigan, and it didn't go great at Michigan. I mean, Michigan, he didn't have great quarterbacks to play with. They kind of monkeyed with their offensive scheme a couple times during his career. So the question with Donovan Peoples-Jones, and we asked the Browns about this a lot, is, okay, his production at Michigan didn't match the talent. Is that more about Michigan, or is that more about Donovan Peoples-Jones? But because if it's more about the situation at Michigan, then you might have ended up with the guy with second or third round talent in the sixth round, which is why it makes sense. If it turns out it's more about him maybe not putting it all together, well, sixth rounder, no big deal. But I do think this is an upside pick. This guy was the number one receiver recruit in America 3 years ago. You don't draft guys based on high school recruiting rankings, but this guy is skilled, and maybe it'll hit in Cleveland.
Well, maybe somebody can tell him behind the scenes that don't worry, if they don't like you, it's because you didn't play well. It has nothing to do with what school you went to.
Yeah, I mean, we went through this with Jabril Peppers. I know it's a thing. I mean, if he catches touchdown passes, nobody will care what color he wore in college. I know Browns fans sometimes get frustrated. They don't take enough Ohio State guys, and they didn't take any Ohio State guys. They did take a Michigan guy. But Ohio State wanted this guy. I mean, so you can pretend he's a Buckeye, because he really is a skilled guy if he can put it all together.
Who else intrigues you other than, obviously, Jedrick Wills? I know when we had talked a couple of times, Doug, you mentioned you wanted a tackle. You got a tackle. By some accounts, it's the top-ranked tackle. The Browns had him number one on their board, and there were some other people that did as well. What are the other players intrigue you as well that the Browns drafted?
Yeah, I was really interested in a receiver hire. But I think the idea that Grant Delpit, he's a safety, but they like him because of his coverage skills. And so can he line up on a slot receiver? They got rid of TJ Carey. Who's your slot corner? They signed Kevin Johnson. You don't know exactly 100% who your future slot corner is. If Delpit can cover slot receivers sometimes, if he can line up and cover tight ends, we know, the Ravens have some good tight ends. There's good tight ends in this division. I think he can fill a lot of gaps for them. So, obviously that's the first 2 picks, but yes, he's a safety, but he really is a coverage guy in the modern NFL with how reliant teams have become on tight end. So I think in the end that pick on a variety of levels, right? Not a great tackler, which is what we heard about Greedy Williams. But again, okay, if you can cover a guy, we'll forgive maybe some tackling issues because coverage is the name of the game.
Doug Lesmerises, cleveland.com, and the Plain Dealer. Doug, is there anybody that once you got past the second round into the third and fourth that the Browns made the pick, and as they make it, you're saying to yourself, how could they not pick so-and-so instead? Did anything jump out at you during let's say rounds 3 and 4?
No, my ignorance is bliss in that situation. I don't know enough to complain about who they should have taken instead, So, I like upside picks, right? So it's like, let's roll the dice on guys a little bit. Nick Harris in the 5th round at center. I like the idea of, again, thinking down the road. Maybe you're thinking about, okay, we keep this guy for a couple of years. Maybe he can replace J.C. Treader down the road. And in the meantime, maybe he gets in on the wide open right guard competition. So I just think there's some picks like that. That's a guy, you listen to the football people. He's a good lineman, but he needs to play in a certain kind of scheme. And it's the scheme that Kevin Stefanski wants to run. So I like the idea. The thing that I like in general, and again, we've sort of joked about this, they traded down a little bit. They got some value. They end up trading down with their 2nd round pick. They get Grant Delpit, who they would have taken anyway at the previous spot, and then they get the pick that leads to Nick Harris, who is going to be, hopefully at worst, a decent backup lineman for you. So it's about maximizing your value, and when you figure out, hey, if we slide back a few spots, we'll still get our guy and add a pick, I like it.
It seems that there was a plan in place. And the other thing that strikes me, and let me know if you I don't remember ever hearing the Browns talk about scheme fit on draft day. And that could be one of the reasons that, we've struggled so hard as a franchise to find guys that can play and do what you want them to do.
Yeah, and I asked Kevin Stefanski about that specifically after the Browns were done picking. And he also sort of wanted to push back, it felt like, and wanted to make the point of, like, we're not going to ignore a good player just because we're focused on scheme. But it's, he said it's their job. If we see a good player and we want him, then we've got to make him, sort of fit into the scheme we have. But we've said it since the day Kevin Stefanski was hired. And I feel like Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski, and Paul DePodesta, while constantly talking about it, are maybe getting tired of talking about it. But scheme fit, alignment, I think the media in Cleveland is still baffled by cooperation. And we're just like, so you guys are like working together and thinking the same things? And they're like, yeah, that's how you win. And we're like, we just haven't seen it before. So, yes, it continues.
You know what else we saw or heard more? We heard more of Paul DePodesta in the last couple of days than we've heard, I think, since he's been here.
Well, it's a ship.
And he's
right?
he's the guy in charge.
He doesn't have to worry about stepping on anybody's toes. Again, Andrew Berry, he brought Andrew Berry in. Paul DePodesta has things the way he would like them to be. And I think he has that because Jimmy Haslam said, I believe in you, Paul DePodesta. So that has allowed Paul DePodesta to go from a guy on the side to a guy in the middle of it. And I would expect that will continue going forward.